Viewers ask me quite often which way of drafting is more correct. Staying open or forcing an archetype. This is because they see various high-level drafters be successful in utilizing completely opposing concepts, different ideologies. Now for this video, I wanted to talk about the two distinct styles of drafting, and then explain my own drafting philosophy, in which I like to call drafting the sleazy way. Welcome back to Deathsie's Duel and Academy. So in sociology, one of the most difficult things to master is trying to remain as objective as possible while also holding on to your own biases or your preferences. You have two contradictory realities, two different ways of looking at things, which are realistically polar opposites, but then there's a value in both of them. You need to, on one hand, remain objective, while still, on the other hand, knowing what you like. Bias is something that, especially here in Magic, people think that it's an inherently bad thing, but realistically, biases are not explicitly wrong. So, in sociology, researchers always do research in areas which interests themselves on a personal level. That bias passion is very important because it provides you with the direction. Here in Magic, we are essentially researchers ourselves who try to hold on to these seemingly contradictory ideals as we engage in a draft. So let's look at two distinct drafting styles and prominent limited Magic the Gathering masters. Ben Stark, who drafts the hard way and tries to remain objective, versus Kyle Rose, who likes to force certain archetypes more so than others. Or, another way to say that is that he drafts in a way which is strongly biased. So Ben Stark, drafting the hard way, he tries to remain very objective. He tries to optimize the overall power level of his end deck, his final deck, by finding the lane that's the most open. Now, this is an enlightening perspective to what we normally call, in contrast, drafting the easy way, which is just trying to open up your pack, to jam your rare, and to continue picking up cards of that color. Drafting the easy way is, if you can imagine, if there's a wave incoming, and you're just getting on that wave and you're just riding it. Now, in drafting the hard way, some assumptions do exist. So, Ben assumes that all color combinations, if open, will yield the most powerful deck in the end. Now, there's also an assumption that all colors are strong, or at least strong enough that if it is open, the reward will be worth it. Now, Ben, even in a set like M20, where the majority of people, myself included, really disliked white as a color, just white being extremely underpowered, Ben was happy to draft white, right? So if white was open and you could get paid off for being white because other people weren't white, then it was worth it. But for me, white wasn't a color that I was happy to play. Therefore, I avoided it, and whenever I did have to draft white, I always regretted it. Now, Kyle Rose, on the other hand, he likes to force certain decks, certain archetypes, and you can say that he's very biased in what he likes in terms of cards and where those cards belong. Now, this is not to be mistaken with drafting the easy way, because Kyle's style is very far from that. Now, he identifies the cards that he likes, and for the archetypes relative to the format of which he likes. Now, of course, he still tries to stay open to colors, but he puts more of an emphasis on his preferences than Ben would. He identifies that not all color combos are created equally, and not all cards necessarily work well in every single color combination. He has a very clear vision of where cards like to go, and understands that even seemingly single color cards are actually multicolored cards to some extent. For example, Tempting Witch from Throne of Eldraine is essentially a green-black card, even though there's no green requirement to cast this card. The general weakness of Kyle's forcing strategy, in my opinion, is that oftentimes even if you cut the colors properly during the draft, and you send the signals well. The problem is that it's inherently more important, the signals and what's getting sent to you, as opposed to the signals that you're sending. The signals you receive are more absolute than the signals you send. So what happens is that you often end up with landing in an archetype that you're happy with the cards that you like in it. However, the overall power level of the draft will vary immensely. It'll vary, and more often than not, it'll be on the lower power level of things. So you'll often end up with a very synergistic deck, but with a lower peak power level because you're fighting over the cards with your neighboring drafters. That being said, you end up compensating for that lower overall power level by creating a virtual power level in the synergy and the game plan within the archetype that you like. So, drafting is a spectrum. That's not to say that both players don't have elements of the opposite aspects within their own drafting style, where certainly, you know, Kyle, even though he forces an archetype, picks cards that he likes, he tries to stay open as often as possible. And Ben has, you know, Ben tries to stay open, but he still has his preferences of cards as well. But what we're looking at here is the degree to which that differs. So for me, essentially, drafting styles are the degree to which you stay open and the way in which you do it. Now, after looking at both Kyle and Ben's drafting styles, I would like to introduce my own drafting style, which I would like to call Deathsie's Drafting the Sleazy Way. Now for me, I recognize the elements of each of their base philosophies being very valuable, but with my own drafting style, it's essentially a hybrid that exists directly in the middle of both Ben and Kyle. While I still like to make picks that keep me open, I will also have strong preferences to which archetypes I like and which archetypes where I want my cards to go into. So sometimes I'll be drafting certain colors, but I'll happily speculate on a card of a different color if the potential payoff of that card is worth taking into account compared to the cards I already have. So, I'm happy to waste picks, you know? People talk about this a lot, where it's like, oh, you're wasting a pick here, and the cost of a pick. But I'm happy to waste that pick to speculate on cards in order to achieve that greatest potential of getting paid off by being in the open colors, but also taking into account the direction towards an archetype or a lane that I think that makes sense and that I like. Therefore, for me, I like to call it the sleazy way of drafting because I want to find not only the best deck, but also to end up in an archetype that I like. So I want to draft a color that is a color combination that's open, but I also want to end up in an archetype that I like. So I want to have my cake and I want to eat it as well. So the question that I posed in the beginning of the video, which style is the best? This answer that I'm about to give you now is very sleazy in itself, just like my drafting style. Because realistically, I think that every style is correct. So, each style has their own merits and disadvantages. Therefore, it's important to be aware of the implications of every single pick. You know, drafts are composed of one pick at a time. So, at every single point, you need to reassess at what point you are and to weigh the pros and cons. Essentially, that's what we do within our drafting styles. So, you know, being aware of the implications of every pick is essentially just, for me, the ultimate form of it is drafting the sleazy way. So you take everything into account and you weigh all the odds. But, you know, whichever style you prefer, just keep in mind what your goal is and draft towards that. Now, as long as you can rationalize your decisions, any philosophy, whether that's drafting the hard way, forcing an archetype, or drafting the sleazy way, is fine. Make sure to like and subscribe down below, and follow me on Twitch to watch me live and to ask questions.